So we thought we would start out with an opening statement by Brett Simpson, and you can tell us whatever you want.
Well, I guess I'd just say, well, how many people went to the Patriots United event last night? Can I get a show of hands? Wow. It's a pretty good turnout, all right. The event, as you know, was a lot of data coming in, and nothing that was new to me, but after the event, then I got to talk to Dr. Frank, and I didn't go to bed till like 3:30, and I got up at 6, so bear with me as we go through this. We'll see what we can get, but I got the fire hose of information afterward from Dr. Frank, and there's so much going on across the nation. Some of it very good, some of it very bad, and we'll go over some of it tonight.
Okay, we're going to start with our first question. It has to do with accurate voter rolls. Brett Simpson, what do you perceive to be the biggest challenge for the Clark County Elections Office in maintaining accurate voter rolls, including the removal of inactive voters from the rolls? How much influence does the county auditor have in this effort? And what grade would you give to the current auditor? If elected, what is your action plan to improve the accuracy of voter rolls in Clark County? That's a lot of stuff, so
sure.
Take your time.
Well, we just start with an F for Kimsey. The reality is he doesn't do anything for our voter rolls. Part of that is he doesn't take the initiative to do it himself. The other part of it is that the voter rolls are actually controlled by our state. And in fact, they don't even control our voter rolls. They're controlled by a third-party company. The name of the company is called ERIC. It's Election Registration Information Center. We got the history of ERIC. I'm going to cheat a little bit because ERIC's a big one because, well, I'll just run down the bullet points and then I'll kind of fill in the blanks. So the history of ERIC, which ERIC was founded in 2011, it was seed funded. Before that, there was a group called Kansas State Crosscheck. And it was a group of states over by Kansas, about 4 or 5 of them, and they would check their own rolls with each other because they had enough populations moving back and forth between the states and they wanted to make sure people weren't voting in 2 locations. The first thing that they did once they formed ERIC is they sued Crosscheck and sued them out of being able to do that themselves and forced them to join ERIC. In 2011, George Soros's Open Society Foundation seed funded the ERIC company, and then Pew kicked in a bunch of money, and then in 2012, Kim Wyman, our former Secretary of State, actually co-founded the ERIC company group, whatever you want to call it at this point, and started it basically with George Soros. And then they just started adding states, and they did their typical lawfare thing, right? Sue them, you need to check your rolls and this and that. So ERIC no longer had competitors, right? We went from 3,000 separate county databases in the 90s. And then they passed the HAVA Act in 2002. And that was a federal level, and they said, yeah, that's too many voter rolls. You need to do one for each, like it needs to be done at the state level, basically. So then we went down to 50 different voter rolls. Then ERIC came onto the scene, and they went up to 31 member states. So now we're down to 19 separate voter rolls, and it's controlled primarily by one group, one company called ERIC. Will you go to the next slide, Scott? So yes, it was originally funded by the anonymous donor and the Pew Center Research on the states. So 2 leftist organizations. The Open Society, if you guys are unfamiliar, is a NGO that is George Soros's NGO, and it creates havoc all over the world, really. So they went through and they just started collecting up. But now the downside, or the sad part, I got to hand it to them. At first, of course, they're kicking in money in there, doing our voter rolls. Now the sad part is we fund them. We send them millions of dollars. Every state sends them millions of dollars to maintain our voter rolls. And if you ever get a chance to look at these contracts, they're horrible. They don't actually require you to clean your voter rolls. It's highly suggested you do, but you don't have to. What you do have to do is they're going to give you a list of people that are eligible to be registered but aren't, and you're required as the auditor to contact 95% of those people to try and get them registered. So what it is it's big data for elections, and it's slanted to one side. They want to inflate the voter rolls, and they want to inflate it with people that they would vote for, right? Or would vote for them. And they don't want to clean anything. They want to keep inflating the rolls, and we'll get to that here in a minute, why they want to keep inflating the voter rolls and why they want to keep increasing that number. Will you go to the next slide, Scott? So here's our fun Washington State ties. And I always tell people, in Washington State, we have a responsibility because a lot of this voter fraud started here. They started here, they perfected it here, and then the poison leached out to the rest of the union. So we're actually responsible for primarily what's been going on as our state. Pew helped Eric get off the ground in 2009. Then the Washington State Co-Director of Elections, Shane Hamlin and Kim Wyman, who was Thurston County's auditor at the time, were part of that group. Wyman became the Secretary of State in 2012, and she was a Republican, of course, which fits into everything we found. There's a lot of, I call it narrative building. There's a lot of, right, they want it to seem like the other side is counting the votes, right? Oh yeah, everybody in the state everybody at the executive level is a Democrat, right? But don't worry, it's a Republican counting the votes. And then of course, that's the only one they never actually run anyone against either, right? They never run a Democrat against that Republican spot. So 2012, Wyman and Hamlin have to run Washington's 100% mail-in ballot elections. So that's when we switched over. So they allowed mail-in ballots to be sent out basically wholesale in 2004. So a county could choose at that time. But in 2011, I believe it was Pierce County was the only one that was still not doing 100% mail-in ballots. And they passed a state law that said, yeah, you're all doing it now. And they forced everyone onto the 100% mail-in ballots at that point. And that's when we really see a lot of the fraud start to shoot up and take off, kind of from what it was. It's been there for a long time, but it really, when you look at the data, it starts shooting off right at 2012. Will you go to the next slide, Scott? We'll skip that one because it's small enough that I can't even read it. So what can we do? The rolls are hard to clean. We go out, we canvass, we find anomalies, and we send them in to clean them. Now they say they clean them, but it's hard to verify that when they're centralized in a third-party company that we are not allowed to look into. They give us lists, what they call the voter registration database, and they give it to us, right, as public records because they're required to, but they cut it off about 3 days before the election. And so we have 3 days between then and the election that we don't know what they've done. Now what we've seen in other states, and this was one of the things I talked with Dr. Frank about last night, they keep 2 books, just like a mob, just like a criminal organization. They have 2 voter lists, and they've seen them where they're swapping them in and out. So they have one out, they're making changes to it, and then they swap it back in. And they do this before the elections. Some of the states, they pump up the rolls 25% right before an election cycle, right? It'll be 25% before the general election. It'll be 10% before an off-year election, right? Before a non-presidential election. And then right after the election, they dump all those voters back out. And so you can see their databases spike right before the elections every time. Because what they're doing is they're creating their credit line to cheat with. They want the inflated rolls because all of those now are spots that you can, a lot of them are real voters. They're people who would be eligible to vote,
like
but
a
they
placeholder.
don't vote. They are a placeholder. And so they built their credit line by inflating the rolls. They started in 1996 with the DMV, the motor voter drive, and they started inflating it then with DMV and everything else. Now they've added in, of course, 17 and 18-year-olds are automatically registered to vote now. But we know from data that most people don't tend to vote till they're about 28. So now you've got a voter for 10 years that you can use their vote. So they've crafted this in inflating. In fact, the good one is, last year, this last session, they actually tried to pass a bill saying that when you're born, you're automatically registered to vote. That's the one that, luckily, I'm going to guess that nobody wanted to put their neck out for that one because somehow it didn't pass in our very lopsided legislature. But that's the point. They want to inflate the rolls. They make it very hard to take anybody off the rolls, and then they don't even take them off the rolls. What they do is they switch them to an inactive status. So that it's on the list. It's just, they're inactive now because they might want to come back and vote later, which doesn't make a lot of sense because we have same-day registration, right? I can walk in and register and vote at the same time. So why do you need to placehold somebody as an inactive if you can go in at any time and register? It doesn't make any sense. But we've seen that in other states too, and some of the data that they have been able to get, where they're switching all the inactives back on the rolls right before the election. Then they're voting and they're switching them back off to inactive after. So the voter rolls are the central part of this. And a lot of people don't realize, we know now George Soros's groups have corrupted a lot of the DAs around the country, right? Before the decade before the DAs, he did it to the Secretary of States. So they started at the voter level, and they started it so they could start marching people into positions of power and key positions so that they could thwart our attempts to keep our republic. Go ahead, Scott. I think that might be it for that. Yeah.
So I have just a follow-up question on that, Brett.
Yep.
So let's say I decide to move to Idaho. I'm not moving to Idaho, but let's say I decide to move to Idaho and I
The
contact...
thought crossed your mind.
Well,
It's crossed everyone's mind at this point.
I'm too old to start a farm somewhere else, so I'm staying in Fern Prairie. But let's say I move to Idaho and I call the elections office and I say, you know, I'm packed up, I'm moving, and I won't be here for the election. Do they not have the authority to remove my name from the voter rolls if I contact them and say I am now out of state?
So if you went through the hoops to get your registration removed, technically they would remove it. However, the removal of you from the voter roll is them sending a notice to Eric.
So Eric is still in charge?
Eric's in charge.
Wow, that is unsettling, to
Yes.
say the least.
And we're only able to find, last I checked, it's been about a month, but they're only able to find 2 employees who actually work for Eric.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay, are you guys freaked out yet? I think it's going to get worse. Okay, you ready for the second question?
Yes.
Our second question has to do with transparency during the ballot counting process. Does Clark County Elections Department, under the leadership of the county auditor, do all it can to provide transparency to the public on election day and in the days following when races are sometimes too close to call as late ballots trickle in?
Yeah, the easy answer is no. They've made everything opaque. And if you were at the Patriots United thing last night, one of the things that Glenn Morgan said, which is very true, is there's a mountain of corruption covered by a sea of incompetence. And that's what they want. They want it so that you're trying to figure out, are they being malicious or are they being stupid? It's hard to tell. And they want that opaqueness, and that's the way they craft rules, laws, and it's not just with the elections. I do real estate development. That is the way they work the planning department and everything else down there too. They keep things opaque, and they know that it's an uphill battle for you to fight them. In the election integrity teams, what we found is, well, at first we got some information out of them kind of early on. What happened immediately after the 2020 election, and people in different counties were doing PDRs and FOIA requests. And this is during COVID, mind you, right, when they can't be bothered to do anything else, but the state legislature ran to session and passed a bill called HB 1068. So it's House Bill 1068. And what it does is it exempts from public disclosure anything having to do with election security, which is a nice vague statement of saying, we just don't have to tell you anything about your elections, right? That, and then they'll cite RCWs, in response to requests that don't actually have anything to do with what you're asking for. They know that it's a huge bar to climb to, one, find a lawyer who will actually help, that's not afraid of being disbarred because they go after their license if you get an attorney to actually help, and then the cost of doing it, right? You're talking tens and tens of thousands of dollars, and they'll drag it out. I'm still in a lawsuit with Joe and some other local people here, and it's 2 years later. And they've kept it in judicial purgatory, and then finally assigned it to a judge that was appointed by Biden. So, suffice to say, it wasn't going to go anywhere, or it's not going anywhere. So this is definitely, we're kind of on our own. We need to fix this, and there are ways to fix it, which hopefully I'll be able to touch on a little bit more here. But let me go through some of the things that we've found as the EIT team. So we kind of came up with a list of what are the highlights, right? What are the 10 things? So they stonewalled our request for a full forensic audit. When this first happened, I got about 55 people together and brought Dr. Frank in and showed the data to all these people, and we said, we need to raise this money. We're going to go to Kimsey. He's a Republican. He's been here a long time. He's a local person. I'm sure he'll understand when we show him the data, and he'll agree. Let's do the audit. We've got the money now, so let's go do it. And of course, I was naive, and that was a big no. So that was the first step, which didn't make a lot of sense to me, because I'm thinking, well, if it's clean, then you get to say, yes, look how good I am, and he'll be elected till the day he dies. And if it's dirty, then he gets to be the hero, because he helped uncover. So it didn't make a lot of sense to me. It didn't at the time. It makes a lot more sense now. Another thing that they did, so that the opaque, we have these, what they're called certified election observers. And what it is you can get certified to go observe the elections, right? And what they want to do is they want to have a Republican, a League of Women voter, and a Democrat, and observe the process, right? And the idea is they're supposed to be able to kind of help catch things, make sure everyone's on the up and up and they're not doing things they shouldn't do. The problem is Kimsey kept ratcheting down on what we were allowed to say or do. So it went from, you can't have cameras, you can't have anything to record ballot information. Okay, that seems weird, but all right. To, you're not allowed to have a pen and paper. To, Ed O'Meara, this is what number 2 is they decertified a Navy veteran, certified election observer, Ed O'Meara, because he was writing down these serialized tags that were on the storage room every night. And then he'd come in and check them in the morning, which is pretty normal. They just didn't know he was doing it. There's 2 doors on the ballot storage, a front door and then one kind of in the back hall. He checked the back hall one day and it was a different tag. And so he brought it up. He said, hey, this is a different tag. What happened? We said, oh, well, it's not a big deal. 2 people were in there at the same time. Mind you, after hours when there's no observers around. Well, they just had to go through all the boxes and find the write-in votes. So they admit they went in there without any of the observers around, and then they rifled through every box. And when he's pressing the issue of, hey, this is a problem, you guys shouldn't be doing this, that's when Kathy down there freaked out on him and accused him of being aggressive and got Kimsey to decertify him and kick him out. And then they smeared him in the newspaper that he was, he was aggressive and had been reprimanded all these times and everything else. So they turned the table real quick and turned to the smears and used the newspapers, I'm sure everyone's aware at this point, to smear anyone who wants to try and bring up the truth. Next thing they do is they muzzle the certified election observers. So they said, you're not allowed to ask questions. You're not allowed to bring anything up. You're not allowed to record the number of anything. At first they said you can bring it to a supervisor, and then that went away too. You can't bug up the supervisors either. So to the point to where you're going, well, what am I doing here? And his response is, well, you're here to observe, not to actually do anything. So it's security theater. And you'll see that throughout the whole process this is designed to look like a legitimate election. It's designed to look like they're doing things. And to most of the staff and people down there, I'm sure it looks like they're doing something, but it's like the TSA. It's a lot of hassle, and it's a lot of expense, and nobody likes doing it. And in the end, it's not very effective. So, the other thing, our voter registration database has 33,000 inactive names on it. We've also found there's 42,000 names of people who have never voted.
Is that just Clark County?
That's just Clark County. So it's 10% of our voter rolls are on the inactive list. So they're people that they've admitted shouldn't have anything to, an ability to vote, but they keep them on this inactive list. We've also got 42,000 that have never voted, allegedly, which, again, doesn't make sense. So the voter rolls aren't clean, and we don't have an effective way to clean them up because we're not in control of our own voter rolls. The last day of voting for Kent's comeback. This is a story I heard from our CEOs. I wasn't there personally, so hopefully I get it somewhat accurate. But as Joe was making his comeback, and they had the Joe heavy votes, right, the last day votes that came in after, they had them all out in the room, and they're counting them all. And then all of a sudden, three guys walk in. One of them in a county shirt, so it's like a county facilities person, and then 2 other guys that were in like HVAC tech outfits, and they start walking back to the back closet where all the optical cables and everything go into. And John and some of the other CEOs stayed on him. Well, what are you doing here? We're counting ballots. Oh, we're just here to check the fire sprinkler system. Which, again, if you've ever done a tour down there, that room is empty 99% of the time. There's no reason to be in there doing maintenance when they're in the midst of a ballot count, especially of a highly contested race, and you have all the ballots out everywhere. It's supposed to be a secure room where only people who are supposed to be there are there. So luckily, John and others stayed on them and basically harassed them until they left. And a very similar thing happened in Maricopa County with Kerry Lake. They tried to stop counting the vote in Maricopa 5 times in the primary, and they had to stay on them and make sure that they continued the count. So about 24 hours after that happened, I believe, is when Jamie Herrera Butler conceded, because the guys finally gave up and said, oh, okay, we'll come back another time, and left. And then about 24 hours later is when Jamie Herrera Butler conceded. So is it a smoking gun? No, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's certainly, if it's not malicious, it's incompetence. Why are you trying to do maintenance in the middle of an election count? But that's kind of, as sad as it is to say, I wouldn't call that unusual in the things that we found and the things that we see. So.
Our third question has to do with HR1, the Voter Protection Act. What is your opinion of the proposed federal legislation titled Voter Protection Act, known as HR1, is uniformity needed, or should this be managed separately at each state level?
So the easy answer is it's unconstitutional. That's my viewpoint. They do try and, like they like to do, they like to dance to gray areas. Because it does say, if you read up here, it says, Article 1, Section 4, Clause 1 of Election Clause, the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. But the Congress may at any time, by law, make or alter such regulations. So the question is, do they have the ability to alter the laws of that, or do they have the ability to alter the first clause of that, right? The first sentence. So they like those gray areas, and they do that a lot in this, which makes it very frustrating. HR1 would be federalizing our elections. It'd be centralizing everything and giving control to the federal government. And that would be the death, the nail in the coffin for all of us. I mean, if they control the we already know they're cheating it wholesale across the country. This just makes it easier for them, makes it more opaque, and makes it easier to do that. So I think it's a terrible idea. I think it's terrible how centralized it is now. It needs to be decentralized. We should be counting at the precinct level on fraud-resistant paper with ID in person on one day. And we should be doing that because we have done it, and it works well. And when they like to say, well, it would just take too long to count the ballots. And when people say that to you, you can say two things. You can say, one is Europe does it. They banned machines in the 70s because they knew that you could hack any machine. So it's illegal to use machines in Europe. And it's sad that they're doing something better than us. I don't like that. But also, what we found from audits in places where they've actually been able to do stuff, it's actually cheaper and faster to hand count ballots than it is to use those machines. They spend far more time and money using the machines. So it's just a lie that they've propagated. Yes, sorry, is that better?
Eat the mic.
Eat it, okay.
Eat the mic.
All right. So HR1, that's most of the problems, is just that it's centralizing power and it's taking away from the states. It's a terrible idea. It's as bad as ranked choice voting. That they're both the same idea in different areas.
We're going to get a little history lesson here. In 2005, the Washington legislature established vote by mail as a permanent option of the elections process for all elections. But it allowed counties in Washington to choose. But in 2011, with 38 of the 39 counties switched to vote by mail, the Washington legislature then passed a law requiring vote by mail statewide. So now it's enshrined in state law. Are you in favor of vote by mail? I think you sort of segued into that a little bit. What are the pros and cons of voting by mail? And short of changing state law, what would you do as auditor to improve the accuracy of vote by mail? since we're sort of stuck with it?
Vote by mail is a terrible idea. It was terrible when they decided to do it, and it kind of goes with the theme, I feel like, of everything, not just in elections, but what's been pushed on us lately, is that they've used our desire for ease and convenience to, basically steal from us, steal our power from us, steal our money from us, whatever it is. And that's what they've done with mail-in ballots. Their pitch is convenient. I kind of say, maybe. Some people find it convenient. But that means it's also convenient to cheat. And that's really the problem, right? You've given up too much convenience, or you've gained too much convenience by giving up too much security. And so that's why vote by mail is such a problem. And if you doubt that, look at the 2020 election, what they ran through in these other states that didn't have vote by mail, right? There's a reason they said, oh, we got a pandemic, we got an emergency, we're just gonna do vote by mail, don't worry about it. And states that had never done it before sent out millions and millions of ballots. So the problems with mail and voting, you don't have a chain of custody. So right away, you've lost the chain of custody. You can't account for ballots. They go out into the mail, and immediately upon going out of the mail, you don't know who's touched them. You don't know where they are at any one time. Chain of custody is broken. And if anyone's done QA, QC for production or anything like that, and you're needing to do what's called risk limiting audits, you know that you have to have chain of custody. If you don't have it, then you can't do risk limiting audits, which is what Kimsey likes to stand on and say, well, I audit, it's a risk limiting audit. Well, the minute you don't have chain of custody, it's theater. It doesn't count for anything. They're utilizing a failing business model with poor morale and undertrained and understaffed employees. Our USPS is falling apart. Now, that's not to say we don't have some good local people here, but if you go into these distribution centers in other parts of the state, especially heavy metro areas and everything else, I mean, it's disaster central. They have really high turnover so that people don't get proper training. A lot of them are on drugs while at work, while they're sorting mail and everything else, and there's no clear processes. So they're losing a lot of mail all the time. Why would we think that they're gonna somehow do better with our mail-in ballots? And if you think that, well, maybe it's not as bad as you think, well, there's a reason why they're making a ballot-specific division of the United States Postal Service, and it's not to benefit us, right? It's because loose lips sink ships, and they want fewer good people, good people that they trust being the ones handling the ballots. Lost, stolen, returned, or damaged. Again, no chain of custody. They get damaged in the mail, they get lost in the mail. What happens to your vote? It's too important to let it sift through that system. There was a good statement last night, which I'd heard before. Would you take $500, put it in an envelope, write on it, say, cash inside, and then mail it to yourself? And is your vote worth $500? Because mine is, and I wouldn't hand that to somebody else and trust that it's gonna get there, especially through that system. So it's a terrible idea. The postmark date, it requires days and sometimes weeks of extended counting, right? It'll take it up to the day of postmark for that day. That's how they drag out the counting in the election, and then that gives them an opportunity to make adjustments in the election. And then it creates the distrust through the uncontrolled third party. We don't trust it. We've seen videos of postal workers throwing ballots out, right? Ripping up ballots because they could tell they were Republican ballots. You can hold up a light to the back of those ballots, you can see which party they voted for. So we've seen them wholesale destroy, their opposing party's votes. So it's not a good system. It's your vote. You should be protecting it until you get it to the auditor, and then your elected official should be protecting that and be able to account for it wherever it is in the process at any time and what he did with it or he or she did with it.
Okay, this is a good segue into the red ballot drop boxes. There's currently 22 of these permanent red ballot drop boxes all around Clark County, Washington. And in your opinion, are these secure? Do you believe additional security measures should be put in place at these locations? And if so, what new systems would you initiate as the county auditor?
So, yes, we have 22 of these boxes here. None of them are on camera. So how many people have seen 2,000 Mules? And if there's a hand not up, please go watch it. It's literally them committing massive voter fraud on video. I mean, it's indisputable. They like to say, there's nothing there. I'm watching them commit voter fraud on video. There's nothing to debate about it. We don't have video for that. And even if we did, because ballot harvesting is not illegal in Washington State, I could see somebody stuffing a whole van full into there, and I got nothing on them. It's perfectly legal what they're doing, or rather it's not illegal what they're doing. I don't like them. I don't think that they're secure enough. I think they're more secure than the USPS. So if you don't have a choice, right, for whatever reason you can't make it to the auditor's office, that's your next best bet. But even their chain of custody from those boxes out, Clark County shut down half an hour early a ballot drop box while people were still trying to drop them off on the last primary. And the people were like, oh, just put it in the bag. And this person's like, I don't know you. Are you collecting ballots? Like, I don't know who this person is. So they're a problem in that way. Oh, Scott, you're playing. That's okay. It's too easy. They're unguarded. I mean, they're on video, and their elections are still certified. Why is that? So having video is a great, add to that, but it doesn't solve the problem.
So would you put video cameras
I would
on
like
the red
to.
boxes if you were auditor?
I would like to put them not only in the red boxes, I like to put them in the election center. We don't have any cameras in the center, and Kimsey won't allow them. We said, well, what if we raise money and put cameras in? No. People will take the video out of context and put it online, and it'll go viral. It's like, well, if you're doing things you shouldn't be doing, probably, but we want the transparency. We want to know that people are in there doing the right thing, right? That they're not running ballots multiple times through the scanners and everything else. What I would like to do, or one of the things I would encourage to do, can you go to the next slide, Scott? But you can't. Fair enough. So one of the ways that I would kind of do a workaround of that, a big part of this is we have to start kind of voluntarily taking some of these steps, right? It's something like we did with Joe's campaign, what Joe was touting. Turn in your ballot last day, right? We want to defeat their cheat. We got to beat the cheat by turning in the last day and coming out in mass to overwhelm the cheat. But the other thing I'd like to do is get people to start turning in at the auditor's office. And if I was auditor, I'd say, come in with your ID, and we'll put a stamp on the envelope saying your ID was checked, so we know it was you and know it went in. And that doesn't solve it for the people who don't do it, but that can tell us which ones were actually legitimate votes, right? Because we actually did check the ID. Our law that says I'm not allowed to require ID to be checked. It doesn't say I can't check ID if they're willing to let me. So we can take proactive steps like that, and it also shoots down the narrative, right, that, oh, we need the convenience of not being there. Well, we turned in 60% of the votes in the last primary on the last day, so people are obviously willing to go on that one day and vote. And if we can keep increasing that and show people we don't need a month to vote, we don't need the mail-in ballots, we're all willing to go to a location, we're all willing to vote, and in fact, the old way of voting was easier because we didn't have to go to the auditor's office, we just had to go to a precinct area, right? It was a lot closer. So being able to do some of those things voluntarily and encouraging people to do it, we can thwart the theft if we're all willing to, inconvenience ourselves a little bit.
Our last question for Brett Simpson is just general thoughts about how elections are conducted in Clark County. Are there challenges that we haven't discussed that should be addressed by the auditor and the staff at Elections Department to restore the public's trust in our election system? I'm sorry, this is like duh, right? Please tell us your thoughts on what plans that you would implement to improve these election processes in Clark County.
Yeah, so one of the big issues we have is the machines, right? The law says we may use the machines, and if you do, they have to be certified, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't say you have to use the machines. So you can hand count if you want. What I would do, probably, is I would run them through the machines, but I designate the hand count as the official vote, because what I want the comparison. In the primary for DeKalb County, Georgia, they ran them through the machines, and then they hand counted them, and the hand count didn't match, so they hand counted them again. And it didn't match the machines, but it matched the hand count. So they hand counted them again. All three hand counts matched, they couldn't match the machines. The amount that it cheated, it went from the machine had the Democrat as the first place. By the time the hand count was figured out, The Democrat was third place. So we can do that. We have the ability in the law right now. Now, that's a law that they would probably rush to change as quickly as possible. But that'd be one thing. The other thing is they like to threaten. In fact, they passed another bill, or they changed a WAC, one of the administrative codes. And they made it so now, if anybody touches the machine or pulls any information off them or anything like that as a third party, then the machines are decertified, right? And the threat is, you gotta go buy $500,000 worth of machines again. I see it as a win-win. I see it as okay, decertify it, and I just won't use them again. I mean, there's no reason that you have to buy them again. We can open them up and look in them, and what we found in other states for these machines is they are connected to the internet. They're connected using cell modems. So when they say they're not plugged in or they're not running off Wi-Fi, it's true. They're using a cell modem. And it's directly on the motherboards. So usually in a computer setup, you have what's called a NIC card, a network card, and it's separate of the motherboards. These are so specially built to cheat that they built special motherboards that have the cell modem directly embedded on it. And so that's what's in there. And we've seen it in other counties and other states, and we have pictures of them. I mean, they've done this. So it is in there. They do connect to the internet, and they will admit begrudgingly that the signature verification is connected to the internet, and they'll say, it's just an internal network, though, to the Secretary of State, right? Because they have to pull the voter information and the voter signature from the Secretary of State level. So they'll begrudgingly admit that that one's connected to, but it's an internal network. Here's the other ugly truth. So in 2019, the Department of Homeland Security, through the Secretary of State, shoved into all the county networks, including our own, what's called Albert sensors. And what they are, and they said this is so for your own security, what they are is they're network monitoring devices. So they just sit in there and they just report, this packet of information went from this device at this time. I mean, it's just literally just kind of recording the flow of information. The problem with those sensors is they're extremely vulnerable to hacking. Like, they're very easy to hack. And in fact, Lincoln County, I believe it was, it's Franklin or Lincoln, the president, I think it was Lincoln County, ended up getting their Albert sensors hacked shortly after the election, and they got a ransomware attack, right? So they had to pay out a bunch of money, and then they had to rip out all the Albert sensors. And then, it's a very small Washington County, and it starts with an F. Ferry County, thank you. Thank you, John. They voted to take theirs out because they said, well, theirs are hacked. And they said it's really easy to hack them. We can't afford they only got 7,000 people in the county. Like, we can't afford a ransomware attack, so they're going to take them out. And of course, you can't do that. That's vital so that we can see what, if there's a problem in your election. Well, the problem with this is for your own good, was that when the ransomware attack happened, nobody at CISA, nobody at the federal level who was supposedly monitoring those actually called and told them that they had been attacked. So it didn't do what it was supposed to do. What it really is they wanted to make our networks vulnerable. So they shoved all these devices in.
That is the end of our questions.
Okay.
But we want to give you an opportunity for a closing statement. Anything that you didn't cover today in any of these questions or answers, feel free to do that now, Mr. Simpson.
I would actually love to take questions. I could speak for hours about this and still not cover everything. So I think it's better if I can fill in knowledge that people are wanting to get. Yep. I'll start. Sorry, I was over here. Yes.
I'm going to bring him the mic.
Okay.
I'm going to bring you the microphone so everybody can hear the question. You have to wait for the microphone. And make sure you eat the microphone. Speak very loudly into the mic.
Thank you very much. How about checking the citizenship of the people that are voting or putting in the votes?
Yeah, I mean, that would be wonderful. So for people who don't know, when they did the DMV thing, right, they did the motor voter rolls, what they actually did was pre-check the box for citizenship. And they had it in an inconspicuous way, and then they directed the Department of Licensing Employees not to talk to or not to bring it up to illegals that were getting driver's license. So they were automatically registered to vote, unbeknownst to them. The amount of illegals that vote is very small, though. Most of them don't want to get in trouble and they don't vote. Most of them don't know they're registered to vote. I'm not saying it's not a problem and I would like to check the IDs. The problem is they've made it basically illegal to ask for proof of citizenship. So I'd be breaking a law to ask for it. I would like to do it. I think it's a necessary part. I think when you register to vote, you should have to prove who you are at that time, and then every time you turn in your vote, you should have to prove that it's you that's turning in the vote. But we have a lot of laws that we have to unwind before we can start doing some of that stuff even.
With the elections the way that they are, how can we be assured if we vote for you that the ballots aren't going to be stuffed again?
So there's a reason I say beat the cheat. It's because they are going to cheat. I mean, that's what they're going to do, right? Anything that's important to them, they will go out of their way and they'll cheat. I'm sure there's some risk analysis, some, they determined for this race, we're willing to risk this much. So for the auditor race, right, getting somebody who's behind the curtain, I'm sure they're going to go all out to cheat. I mean, that's probably what they're going to do. So what we have to do is overwhelm it. I'm not going to win with 51% of the vote because it won't be 51% of the vote when they count it. So we have to overwhelm it, and we have to turn in that last day so they're flying blind, because when you turn it in early, they make adjustments. They have their pre-cheat, and then they adjust as the ballots come in, and they know who's likely to vote what race, what party, because they have all of our data and voting history. And so we want them to be blind to the last minute so that we can overwhelm their cheat.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes. It's hard to know without going full. The audit is what we need to determine it. And most of the data that we can get that I would say is kind of concrete is the presidential level data, because we can't drill down to the individual races as well. Seth Keschel has a pretty good estimation on there. The PCAPs, the whole thing, if anyone's familiar with the PCAPs and what happened with Lindell, the PCAPs were real. There's a whole fun story behind that, which I can get into one-on-one if anyone's interested in hearing that. But they were unable to basically work backwards and determine what it is. So those values that you saw Mike Lindell flash up, those are probably very accurate for the presidential election. I mean, it was massive. I'm looking at Brian back there because he's a lawyer. Yes and no. So there's a couple things again, right? One is I'm not a lawyer. I can't do it. At best, you're talking about the prosecuting office, right? The prosecuting attorney office. My experience has never been friendly with them, right? I've never seen them go out of their way to help citizens. It's to protect the bureaucracy. So whether or not they'd be willing to do it or do it well enough is one question. Two, can you get a judge to do it? And three, what they've liked to do, what all these judges like to do is say you don't have standing, right? They like a process. You don't have process there. And so it's how do you get through their kind of barriers that they've set up for it? So yes, somebody could sue on it. I've been talking with some lawyers because as a candidate, I have a better argument for standing when it comes to some of this stuff, and that's what I'd like to do. Again, though, money is a big problem of that. If you can find lawyers that are willing to essentially risk their law license for it.
Third question is, okay, if I don't understand the county and the paper votes, do people vote on machines and they go somewhere? Or do people vote by mail where the machines only count, you go back and vote on them?
So there's a lot of different machines that they use. They have a Pitney Bowes sorter, which sorts them and cuts open the envelope so they can pull out all the stuff. At the same time, it scans the signature, and that's when they start doing signature verification. That's also why when the Secretary of State's alerted that you voted, right? So they'll say, we don't count the ballots early, and that's true, they don't count the ballots early, but when they scan your envelope, they know you returned a ballot. And they know who you vote for, or who you're likely to vote for, right? So they can make adjustments. They use machines to scan it in. That's what we've seen the most of, right? Or we're kind of hearing the machines that's scanning in. We see that they can switch votes. They can literally digitally crop your vote and put it on the other one, and it can do it faster than the scanners can actually scan the image. So and since it's done at the base level, the file looks like it was never messed with. So even if you were to look at those images, you wouldn't be able to tell that they flipped it. But we know they did it because they did it in 2000, and a couple of college kids are the ones who wrote the code, and it only took 392 lines of code to write. So that's the other fun thing. These programs they use to run our elections are hundreds and hundreds of megabytes to count ovals on two sides of paper. It doesn't make any sense, right? Unless you're doing a lot more than just counting those ovals. Yeah.
Brett, we have another microphone, so we want people to raise their hand, and I will bring the microphone to questions, and this gentleman is next.
Sure.
Sorry, Rick. I didn't mean to jump in line in front of you. First, Brett, I want to say thank you on behalf of the voters of this county for stepping up. You are clearly a quality candidate, and really grateful because nobody needs the kind of headache that you've taken on, so thank you. I just wanted to ask, you spoke about the bureaucracy just a moment ago. I personally believe that will be your biggest challenge initially going into that office when you win. And I'm curious, do you have like a ready to run the office on day one, like maybe 3 bullet points that you're gonna execute immediately to try and set the tone for that bureaucracy to say, hey, I'm here to clean things up, and it's gonna be kind of my way or the highway. So maybe 3 or 4 bullet points that you're gonna execute.
Yeah. So the first thing to do when you go into those fun situations is you gotta go look at their union contract. Unfortunately, I'm beholden to whatever has been in place, right? But that doesn't mean there's not room to maneuver, so you have to be smart about how you're gonna maneuver through it. And yes, I think that my mere presence is probably gonna be an alert to a lot of them. Now, there are actually good people in there who are very helpful in telling us what's going on, so there are people that care and do work in there. But there are people that we'll see, we'll see their true colors when it comes to doing things properly. One of the first things I'd like to do is put cameras in. That whole place should be on cameras all the time. A ballot is more important than money, right? In my opinion, the only more important thing is our kids. Besides the kids, that's the most important thing, because the money they can make worth nothing, and they can take it away if we don't have power over them, right? So the vote is the most important thing. Why do we have cameras on every ATM, every bank, everything, right? Why does everything have to reconcile? Why does the data has to be redundant? Because it's that important, and so are our votes. So that would be cameras, checking the union contracts, figuring out how we can streamline it, right? One of the biggest things will be setting up a hand count process and procedure, right? Something that can be done quickly, that doesn't give the opportunity for people to think or do it in a way that they can mess it up or cheat it, right? We just want it to flow and not have any one person have too much control. So it's setting up basically a production line, which I've done in production before, and we jokingly called it dumb proofing, right? You want it dumbed down enough that somebody can't do it the wrong way. So those would be my kind of first 3 things into it, and then it depends too what the citizens want, right? If they want to come in and do an audit, okay, we'll go do an audit. I work for you. I'll do what you say. As long as it's not illegal, I'm glad, I'm happy to do it.
Brett?
Yes.
The elections part of the auditor's job is absolutely critical, no question about it. But a lot of people don't realize there's a whole nother piece to that job that's also very critical. I know because the number 2 guy in charge of finance at the county is a liar, and a jury in this county proved when they voted in our favor and said the county lied when they changed the departments down there. So we already know he's dishonest, and he's the one that's responsible for the finance aspect of the county. The election job is half of the position, but you're also in charge of the finance operation and the auditing operation in county government. And tell me what your plans are in that area, because it is just as corrupt as the election part is.
Yeah. It's the same thing. It's dig to the truth and lay it out. It's going to be, whatever I find is probably going to be really ugly, and we get to see it all. So it's going to be a horror show, I'm sure, what we find. But that's the idea. We need to see what it is, because we can't fix it if we don't see what it is. So yes, it's digging into there and it's finding out what it is. I've had projects before, I'm looking at my father-in-law over there, where some fraud was committed, $1 million, multi-million-dollar fraud, and while the project's running, and we've had to tear it apart, figure out what happened, why it happened, what's real, what's not, while you're trying to finish out projects. So oddly enough, I have some experience in doing that, and I've had experience with big budgets and big contracts. So I'm not too worried about that part of it. I'm worried about what I'll find, because you're right, I think it's just as bad as the rest of the election system, but we will tear it apart and find out what's what, and hopefully we can find a lot of money and savings, and we can figure out some other stuff like body cameras that can save us money across the across the county budget, because we need more sheriffs, and we need more training, and we need more equipment for them, and we need to stop spending so much on things like litigation, right? So being able to uncover how much are we spending in those areas is important to make good decisions. Go ahead, Rick.
Recently, the software in the election office was upgraded, and unfortunately, going back to the signature thing, it appears that the historical signature files somehow didn't make it over to the new software database. Can you explain what happened there?
Yeah, I'm not surprised. So right after the 2020 election, so it was March, April timeframe, I think it was April, the vendor decided to do they said we need to do a trusted build upgrade, because this is the other sad part. The 2020 election was run on Windows 7 as an operating system. Mind you, Windows 7 had stopped being serviced by Microsoft 10 months earlier. So we ran an election on an operating system that's not very secure in good times, but also hadn't been serviced for 10 months with security updates. So what they did is, what they told us is that Hart InterCivic came out and upgraded the systems. What really happened, because we found FOIAs of emails between the vendor and staff at Clark County, is that they pulled the hard drives out of the machines and shipped them via FedEx, which is illegal because you're not maintaining chain of custody, and shipped them down to Hart InterCivic in Austin, Texas. And they wiped the hard drives completely. And they put on Windows 10, and then they put on the newer Verity version. But all the data's gone. They wiped out, now, Kimsey will say, I backed up the databases. Backing up a database is like taking a snapshot of the website at the end, right? It doesn't tell us what the logs were, it doesn't tell us how the software ran, it doesn't tell if anyone was doing stuff in network. The law's very clear, you have to maintain all of those records. And has anybody seen a movie called Selection Code? It's a documentary. I highly suggest you go watch it. It's free. You can stream it on Rumble. It's about Tina Peters in Mesa County. She was let in early on the fact that there's fraud. She was actually, Dr. Frank's the one who talked to her, explained it to her. Now you got problems, and here it is. So what she did was she did what's called a forensic image. She imaged the hard drives. And this is what banks and data centers have to do, because what it is it's like taking a picture of the data. You can't manipulate it, right? If I just download and put data on something, I can manipulate the data, you wouldn't know I manipulated it. But if you take an image of it, you can't manipulate the data. That's what you're supposed to do. That's not what he did do. If you took an image of those hard drives, you would have all the settings, all the logs, everything, and it would be forensic, so it would stand up in a court of law that this wasn't changed. You could tell if it was changed. Now, I'm going to guess that even though we have a database, because we don't have an operating system the same, and we don't have the same version of software, that we wouldn't even be able to read the database. So that's kind of what's gone on, right? He's been there a long time. I don't understand how you couldn't have learned basic IT stuff or talked to somebody who knows basic IT stuff in order to back up the data, which is primarily your job, is to contain records and so that we can make sure that everything happened the way it's supposed to happen. Does that answer your question, Rick? I leave anything out? The signature verification, I'm not surprised that things didn't port over properly. Like Len said, it's government. I mean, they're changing over the building permitting system down there, and they've launched that 3 years ago, and they've never gotten it right since. So I'm not surprised they didn't get that right.
Brett, I am one of the new CEOs, the certified election officers, not officers, what are we?
Observers.
Observers, thank you. I didn't feel like an officer because I didn't have any authority. So it was interesting going through that process, and going through the initial tour, Kathy Garber, who is the immediate supervisor below Kimsey, took us through the halls of the auditor's office. And it was interesting to me that Kimsey was bringing up the rear, and I'm thinking, what are you looking for, Mr. Kimsey? But he was there following us, and I don't quite know what his process was. I felt a little, I didn't feel like I had authority for what I was doing. All I was there was to observe. If I saw any anomalies, I didn't have the ability to say anything, which is what you were talking about. And I did bring up something I was concerned, and I kind of stood up, kind of in a quandary. I was watching the signature verification process, and I walked toward Kathy Garber's office, and Kimsey was in the office, and he said, Liz, do you have a question? So somehow he knows who I am. And I said, I think I saw an anomaly. And thank you to John Anderson and Rick Vermeers and Marilyn Rogenkamp for your work. You did a tremendous job of scheduling us, of training us, and putting us in the position. And we outnumbered the League of Women Voters and the Democrats in that process of watching the election. We did a good job of that. And yet, we were powerless. I did bring this up, and Kathy Garber looked up the thing I questioned. She says, your job is not to question, it is to observe. And so I was kind of squashed on that process, and yet I was asked, she did look at it, but she says, your job is to observe, not to question. So I would like to second the need for cameras. It is amazing that in the whole process, we have no cameras to observe. So thank you for your intention to do that.
Thank you, Liz. Okay, remember, we're asking questions of Brett Simpson.
Let's see if I can remember what it was. Brett, I have people who tell me they're not willing to stand in line to vote, and of course my response is obvious. We don't have any trouble getting people to go down there last minute on the last voting day and put their ballots in to where they really do get, and they can't forecast whether it's going to be and overcome them. My question is, if there was a day set aside where this was done and the community was more involved in getting it done, is there any possibility that we could make this a good thing that brings the community together to where we're all basically celebrating our independence on the day that we vote and make use out of it? Is that a crazy concept?
No, I think that's exactly what it should. It should be like it was before. It should be like it was pre-mail-in ballots, right? We should go to our precinct. We should have one day. We should look at making it a holiday. That's fine. I get it. People want to do it. If you have a good excuse, like you're, a doctor, a police officer, you got a job where you can't just take the day off, you can request a ballot, right? You can do something, or we can create a second day for those people to come and do it in person too. The idea is that, yes, we can come in as a community, we can do it quickly. We want to check IDs, but also if you're in a precinct of 1,200 people and you're doing this, once or twice a year, you're going to recognize people, right? It's going to be very obvious when people stick out, and if they stick out, you can go say hi, and maybe it's a new neighbor. But yes, they've continually, as centralizing this, they've stripped away the community in a lot of what we do, and they've pulled it away, and they've diminished it as being something to be prideful of and something that we enjoy doing, and taking an active role in running our government. And I think that's important to get back for reasons other than just election integrity. Yeah. Who has the microphone?
Hi, Brett.
Yep.
I I have two questions here. The first one, I'm not in LD 18, but I'm kind of stuck on something. John Lee got almost 8,700 votes. There was 4 candidates, 3 of them were Republicans. And how can you move forward with that issue? Shouldn't it be a revote, a special vote for that situation?
Yeah, I mean, the first failure was if somebody's putting in for a candidate, right, the auditor should be double checking that they're supposed to be a candidate. Now, if you have a problem, you would see it. If you don't, then you shouldn't have a problem, right? Like, there was no vetting of anybody, including myself, who put in for a candidate. He doesn't check anyone, and he says that, oh, it's on the honor system. And it's like, what? You should be making sure that they meet the requirements of whatever they're running for. So that's the first failure, and that was Kimsey's failure. He should have caught it if it was a problem. When it comes to, I guess, the judge's ruling,
November 8th, are we saying goodbye to 2020 and agreeing with the outcome of the 2020 election?
I think there's 2 parts to that. I don't think so, and I agree with Joe's comments before that he wants to go and adjudicate at the federal level and say, we need to figure out what happened. I don't like to say we should walk away from at Washington State's level. The problem is our data's gone. It's gone. We don't have anything to determine. I don't have anything to compare. All the electronic data's gone. So all I have is physical ballots, which, what do I match them up to? And they've had enough time to monkey with anything if that's what they were going to do. So unfortunately, I think in Washington, because we're so far down the rabbit hole, we are kind of stuck. But at a national level, I think it needs to continue. I mean, this is not a small deal, what's been done, right? They stole the government from us. This isn't, they stole from Trump. We wanted Trump to run the presidency for us. We wanted some of these other people to be our representatives, but they stole the government from us. And it's treason. Right? It's treason. I don't know if that's not treason. I don't know what would be, right? You undermine government, you stole it from us, you've installed people that we didn't want there, that's pretty obviously at this point have very nefarious, ill intent towards us. And so what else would it be besides that?
Okay, when do I do it?
And I think you can't just let it go, or it'll be done again.
Hi, Brett. Yes. There are a few of us here who actually at the elections office, and I began in 2018 because I wanted to know what the hell is going on down there. I'd heard rumors, I had heard all kinds of stories. I knew how it was affecting my business. I have a business full-time, and I went down as an observer and did that little tour that Liz spoke of. And I learned from the phone company that the people in the glass offices are the ones you go, oh, thank you. And the people in the little cubes, you go, hi. And I did that whole thing. I was very polite and respectful. And then I got invited back to be a signature authenticator. I was FBI trained by a fraud guy out of Spokane. I did that for a while and became trained on all the programs. I update registrations on Oliver New, Oliver Update, DOL, DHS, ERIC, NCOA in-state, NCOA out-of-state, whatever it is, I'm updating. And I was watching as things were happening over the 2020 election, and I said to my husband, my gosh, when I look at the amount of people that are not getting ballots, that are ineligible to get ballots, we can pull a list. I could pull a list and say, these are the amount of people that haven't voted in 10 years. They haven't got a ballot in 10 years. What's to keep somebody from actually sending one out for them or actually voting it? And I kept a list of all of the numbers of new registrations that totally blew me away. And I asked, my gosh, is Oregon empty? Because they keep coming over, or they're claiming they're coming over, and I kept a documented list day by day and was sharing it with people I work with and saying, holy moly, moly, look at all the new people that are registering to vote. And then I noticed right after the election how it just dropped off and they started going away. And I said, where are they going? And Mr. Kimsey said, they just don't like to be on the registration rolls. Well, I didn't know because I was new and still working hard. But I can tell you that this election that we just had, this primary, had them skittling. It was crazy because there was a rumor that the Brett Simpson and Joe Kent team were going to hold a huge rally, and they ran out and put chalk on the road for where they could or couldn't go, and they hired security to come in because they were so afraid. And one woman said, is it safe for me to go out and get in my car in the parking lot? I was like, what are you talking about? It was crazy. But now we're preparing for this next election. We're hiring new people for SIG-off. We're getting ready, and they said they're going to go at it like it's a presidential. I did not know that someone said, drop your ballot in late. We vote early really fast because we don't want to be on everybody's list. But I was told that the Joe Kent team, and I asked Joe, and he didn't seem to know how this happened. 92,000 ballots dropped on us Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Tuesday was election day. I didn't hear this come out. Are we making this a public thing? Are we going to do it so that we all do? Because I think, I don't know, from what I'm seeing from Dr. Frank last night and the other people, that appears to be the best thing possible because they can't calculate the margin of those who don't get ballots to prepare them, like Skagit, 29,000.
Yes.
Is that actually happening?
Yes. So that's what we're encouraging everyone to do. We want them to turn it in the last day. We want you to walk it into the auditor's office and put it in the bin in there. So that is exactly what we want to do. And then the second part of that is that we want to, go ahead, Liz, you.
Well, we heard it here tonight. That is a great strategy, and I heard it originally from CCRW First Vice President Liz Klein that we should just start turning in our ballots on Election Day. But don't get confused about what day it is.
Yes.
And we're gonna have 3 more questions, and we'll have the third one from you.
Hey, Brett. One of the first things that you said was you're going to have to check the union contracts.
Yep.
How the hell did we get all these people under unions? They work for us, and you can't fire them. What is the process that we need to clean up the offices, to clean up our bureaucracies? Because that's what Trump thought the entire time he was in. Yeah, there were some good people, but they were probably useful idiots. They weren't aware of the big picture going on behind the scenes. How can you do that locally for us? Is it something we have to turn to Joe and say, Joe, you do it? You're our state congressman. Joe.
Yeah, Joe wouldn't, I don't think. He's got his own swamp to deal with out in D.C., and that's why we're kicking him over there to do it. No, it's the same thing. It's going to be everywhere, right? Our government's infected from the bottom up. It didn't just start at the top and work its way down. It started probably everywhere, but we have to change that at the local level. It's a little out of my purview as the auditor. It's not choices I get to make. I personally think, and I used to do commercial construction, and it was union, and to me there was a good benefit for the trade-offs of dealing with the unions was that you had a shared labor pool and you could scale up. Contractors could scale up and do projects, and then they weren't carrying all those people. So there was a mutual benefit, right, that they got out of it. I see no mutual benefit in public unions, right? Public employees, to me, it's a usurpation of our power, right? They're supposed to work for us and they're servants. If they don't want to be public servants, then don't take the job. But to have a union puts bargaining power over us and over our running of the government. And to me, that's, it's undermining our power. And that's our state constitution. First section, first article, right? That all power is reserved for the people. Well, that's giving up our power. So that'd be my personal feeling on it. I don't know that I could do much as auditor. As far as that group, Well, that's why I look at the union contracts. There's always a way to do it. It's just not easy to do it. Yes. Yep, and like I said, one, I do it the best way I could, and if we run into problems, you're right. I'm an elected official. All I have to worry about is being impeached or not reelected, right? My intention is to fix this as much as possible while you guys all find another auditor, because this isn't something I want to do long term. So I don't need to worry about getting reelected. I just need to be worried about getting impeached before I can do enough work.
Okay, Brett, I've got the mic right over here. Woo.
Yes.
So our president here, she reminded me that this is supposed to be a question and not a commentary. So I'll try to make a commentary sound like a question. So I worked up close and personal at the county office, in the county commissioner's office for almost 4 years with David Medor, who was one of the best counselors we've ever had, in my opinion. And I can tell you, I just want to give a heads up to all of the people running for the county positions and for you. The swamp at our county, I was shocked to find out, is really deep. So when these people go in, I caution them, they will be approached by the bureaucracy right away to try to convince them that they are on their side, want to help them, will work with them. But their goal is to keep the status quo and to just keep you at arm's length while they hold all the power. And so here's my question. I'm looking at our new counselor here, and Don Benton, and who else is here? But anyway, when you go into the office, I'm sure because you have invested so much personal time as a private citizen, finding out the layer upon layer upon layer of what's going on in that office, you will be aware of and careful when you come in. You can't just come in like a raging bull. Everybody needs to be patient with these people when they get in, because they have to work through a deadly system. So, are you going to be elected? That's my question.
Am I going to be elected? I sure hope so. That's what we're trying to do. Yeah. Good question at the end, yeah. Can I make one commentary? She's very right. You know, I've dealt with the biggest part of the bureaucracy of the county, which is all the community planning, it's all the permitting, it's everything else. There's a sprinkle of wonderful people that actually are down in the county that are the only reason we still have any level of functionality at the county. And I want to praise them usually. I'm thinking of one in particular that I work with quite a bit. And all the contractors know, don't go say good things about her. And she asks us not to say good things about her because they will run her out. That is the culture and that is the attitude down there. If you are helpful, if you are good, I've seen them do it to dozens of people through those divisions. If they come in and they want to actually serve the public, they want to help you figure out what to do, which forms to do, they will run them out of there. They make them miserable till they quit.
Okay, we're going to take one more question for Mr. Brett Simpson from this nice lady right here. And I don't need a microphone, but you have a really big voice. But it needs to be a question.
It will be. It'll be short. Hey, Brett. Hello. Anything with George Soros' name attached to it makes my skin crawl. So I know that you alone probably can't fix this, but what is the process in the state of Washington for getting Soros out of managing our election rolls?
Yeah. So there's two ways to do it. One is we can get the legislature to pass a law. I'd like to say that's possible. I don't have a lot of faith that that's possible. The other thing to do is to get a Secretary of State in that just stops it. It's not a law to use Eric. Currently, it's the Secretary of State's choice to use Eric. So new Secretary of State or a law saying we don't use them? I mean, take a pick. My hope would be to get in there if there's a way to take the lists and try and do basically a manual comparison outside of the system to see what we're being given and whether or not it's accurate. It's going to take a lot more effort, but we need to understand. We basically kind of have to build a parallel system to be able to evaluate what they're doing in the bad system and then proof that they're doing it, right? So.
Thank you all for asking good, thoughtful questions. And Brett, we're going to give you the last word before we move on to 2 other items of business.
If I have any more words right now. Encourage everyone to vote. I guess the last thing is where they're getting the biggest part of their credit line isn't, fake voters, isn't this? It's real people who are registered to vote that don't vote. Like I said, they know whether you vote or not. They have a huge credit line. So encourage people who don't normally vote and aren't normally engaged, tell them to come vote. All right, just tell them to come out and vote, because not only then hopefully they vote for what we'd like, so we get a vote, but you're also taking away from their credit line. And so you're limiting their ability to cheat. So the more that we can engage people in the community to actually go vote, and it's a mail-in ballot, and if you really want, right now, it's not illegal to ballot harvest, so you can say, I'll take it to the drop box, or I'll take it to the auditor's office if you fill it out and seal it up and sign it. That's how we beat them, right? We got to take away their credit. Yes. Yeah. She asked if you can take somebody else's ballot to the auditor's office. Yes. Ballot harvesting is not illegal in Washington, so.
So let's get.
Oh, and I'm supposed to say, please go to my website at simpsonforauditor.com.
Yeah.